Hey, what's going on, guys? We have some breaking news, some major fight announcements for a UFC Fight Night card in Mexico on February 24th of next year, and that is Brandon Moreno versus Amir Albazi, and also Yair Rodriguez versus Brian Ortega too. And these are being reported by legitimate sources. I'm going to give my reaction and early prediction for both those fights, but I want to start off by talking about two other fights that have been recently rumored, and a lot of people have been running with it, but they aren't necessarily true. They aren't even close to being official, and they aren't being reported by legitimate media sources. But I want to discuss these fights because a lot of people have been commenting and messaging me and say, well, Joey, why didn't you make a video about this? For those of you who do not know, Dana White did a podcast with Full Send, and they did it in the War Room, and the War Room wall has a bunch of fights on it. And basically, two major fights were leaked from this War Room wall. One being Kevin Holland versus Michael Venom Page. Now, if you look closely, next to the names is a red dot, which means they are targeting the fight. So that means this fight is not official. Michael Venom Page recently came out and said, I don't even have a contract with the UFC. After this War Room wall was leaked, Kevin Holland started getting an influx of messages, and he said he hasn't even been offered the fight. Now, this fight is rumored for UFC 297 in January in Canada, and it may still happen. I have a feeling it's probably not going to happen at UFC 297. As far as the matchup itself, I love the matchup. I think it's perfect matchmaking. It's almost a mirror match in a way because, in my opinion, Kevin Holland and MVP are very good strikers. They have knockout power, but they're overrated. I've been saying it about both of them for literal years. MVP, the first time he really fought elite opposition was against Douglas Lima. He got brutally KO'd. He had a rematch with him and won a split decision. He should have lost that fight. Kevin Holland's a guy people have been hyping up forever. He lost to old man Wonderboy Thompson last year, where a lot of people thought he was going to steamroll him. So I think Kevin Holland and MVP is a perfect fan-friendly matchup of two guys with a very high skill level. But MVP, honestly, is more overrated than Kevin Holland. He's been crushing cans for literal years. He's 36 years old. He's a free agent. He probably will make his way to the UFC. He probably will end up fighting Kevin Holland. That makes a lot of sense, and it's a fun fight. But ultimately, do I think it happens at UFC 297? I don't think it happens at 297 because, you know, that's getting pretty close. I mean, what's that, 6-7 weeks away? I know some guys have 8-week training camps, and maybe they don't have a deal in place yet, but you have MVP saying he hasn't signed a contract yet. You have Kevin Holland saying he hasn't even been offered the fight yet. I'm assuming it's not going to happen, but I wanted to give my thoughts on it anyway because a lot of people have been asking me about it. Also on the War Room wall, there was another leak for February 10th, which would be Cory Sandhagen versus Umar Nurmagomedov. Now, I absolutely love this fight. I think this fight probably does happen. Does it happen on that date? Probably. We got plenty of time till that date. It kind of makes sense. Both guys coming off an injury. Now, in terms of the rankings, it doesn't necessarily make sense because Umar's ranked, towards the back of the top 10. You have Cory Sandhagen, who I think is ranked in the top 5 currently. Cory Sandhagen should be right behind Merab in terms of title shot worthiness. But unfortunately, we know what's going on with the division right now with Chito Vera, who got dominated by Cory Sandhagen not that long ago, getting a title shot over him, which makes absolutely no sense. But as far as this fight, I'm not going to spend too much time on it just because it's rumored right now. As soon as it's official, I'll make a full video on it. Absolutely love this matchup. I think it's a banger matchup. Early prediction, I would have to go Cory Sandhagen just because Umar has looked so good, but he hasn't fought the best competition. Now, I love these fights where they take a guy who has a lot of hype behind him, who's looked very skillful and impressive in his UFC career, and they throw him to the wolves. That's why I love Sean O'Malley versus Petr Yan. So I love this matchup, even though it doesn't necessarily make sense ranking-wise, but I have to go with Cory Sandhagen for an early prediction. But if this fight is announced, I'll make a full dedicated video breaking it down and discussing it. But people have to realize, and I want to discuss, this is why I wanted to bring up those two rumored fights in this video. People have to realize everything you see on Twitter, everything you see on Instagram is not reality. It's crazy to me. There's so much fake news in MMA, and just because people saw it on the War Room wall doesn't make it legitimate. It doesn't make it legitimate. The MMA community lacks media literacy. They don't know how to see that and say, okay, well, what does that mean? Okay, well, the 2 red dots next to it, we know from the past where Dana White's showing the wall, that means they're working on it. That doesn't mean it's official. Oh, also, do UFC fights all the time that the UFC is targeting, do they not come together all the time? Yes. It is never official until both fighters sign on the dotted line. And even then, something can happen. There could be an injury or something along those lines. But at least once it's being reported as a done deal and signed, we can start to get excited about it. But, even for Sandhagen Umar, that would probably be a main event, but they've already announced the main event of Joe Pyfer versus Jack Hermanson for that fight card as the main event. So even that, I don't think it's happening on that date. And you have these bullshit Instagram accounts, these bullshit Twitter accounts, a lot of YouTube content creators just taking them at their word because they want the engagement, they want the clicks, they want the retweets, they want the likes. And it's just, it just leads to people being, a couple weeks from now when it gets announced for a different date, people are going to be, well, what happened? This was just announced a couple weeks ago, and a lot of fans are confused. So you have to pay attention to the sources of the information. I know it was leaked on the wall, but if you looked at the wall, you had Jalen Turner versus Renato Moicano on that wall as well, which obviously isn't happening because Jalen Turner is fighting this Saturday. So even if that fight does inevitably end up happening in the future, it's not going to happen early 2024. It just doesn't make any sense. So make sure you check your sources when you're looking at MMA news. And I always try to be very clear whether I'm talking about a fight that's speculative or rumored or done. And usually when you have these kind of weird kind of reports, I usually just don't even cover them because I'm like, well, then a couple days later, it's not even going to be official. Unless it's a massive fight announcement that's being reported as targeted by a legitimate source, a proven source, usually I don't cover it. But let's get to the fights that are actually legitimate, that have actually been reported by a legitimate source. Now, I don't know which one of these is going to be the main event of the UFC Fight Night card in Mexico, but either one of these would be a great main event. Let's start off with Brandon Moreno versus Amir Albazi. Number 1 flyweight and former champion Brandon Moreno versus number 3 Amir Albazi. I absolutely love this fight. I love this matchup. Brandon Moreno is coming off one of the best fights of the year against Alexandre Pantoja. Lost his title via split decision. It was an amazing fight. I thought it could have went either way. And now he's fighting Amir Albazi, who has a decent amount of hype behind him, but he's kind of unproven in a way. He's looked good, but his best win was against Kai Kara France in his last fight. And, it was a controversial fight. I thought Kai Kara France should have probably took that fight. It was close enough where I didn't think it was a robbery. But nonetheless, Amir Albazi has looked very impressive, but he hasn't fought the best competition outside of Kai Kara France. And now he's getting a massive fight against Brandon Moreno. I mean, this is a huge fight against a former champion. And I wonder about Brandon Moreno because he's been in so many wars. He's taken so much damage. He's still young, but those fights against Deiveson Figueiredo, I really think took a toll on both of those guys. So I'm curious if Amir Albazi, coming in a little bit fresher, not having been in so many wars where he's taken so much damage, I wonder if he can come in here and out-grapple Brandon Moreno. Brandon Moreno has shown excellent wrestling and grappling, excellent boxing, but he's been through so many wars. But I do love that this fight is on a UFC Fight Night card in Mexico. It makes perfect sense. Brandon Moreno is, from Mexico. He's a very popular fighter in Mexico. So it just makes perfect sense to have him on this card. And, I mean, both these guys are so good, and they're both so well-rounded. I think Brandon Moreno has a striking advantage, a very clear striking advantage, particularly a boxing advantage. Amir Albazi might have the grappling advantage, but I don't know. Over the last couple years, it seems, as Moreno kind of went through the Figueiredo saga, it seemed like he vastly improved his wrestling. I mean, he was out wrestling Deiveson Figueiredo at will, basically, in their last fight before he inevitably got the TKO against Figueiredo. And he was even doing very good against Pantoja, who has excellent jiu-jitsu and excellent submission skills. And Pantoja had his back on multiple occasions, wasn't able to find a submission. So I think this is going to be a very tough fight for Amir Albazi because he has decent striking, he has decent power, but he relies a lot on his grappling. And even in the Alessandro Costa fight, which was 2 fights ago, he fought Costa on short notice. Costa stepped in on short notice. And he had some trouble early. He had some difficulties grappling him early. That's a bit of an exaggeration. But the point I'm saying is, if you're having trouble against Costa, I mean, it's going to be a massive jump up against a guy like Brandon Moreno, who has excellent grappling, excellent jiu-jitsu, so well-rounded, so durable. I don't really know, what's the hole in Brandon Moreno's game? I guess, being able to be a little bit out-grappled, but against the elite of the elite in Alexandre Pantoja, is there anyone with better BJJ in the flyweight division? I don't think so. And Pantoja's getting his back and holding him there and not even able to find a submission. So I don't know if Amir Albazi is going to be able to get Brandon Moreno down, control him, beat him up, and get a decision or maybe find a finish because Moreno's so durable. I mean, if Figgy can't finish him, who's going to finish him? Brandon Moreno's never been finished in his entire UFC career and his entire MMA career. He's never been finished. So his 7 losses are via decision. And look at the level of competition he's fighting. Alessandro Pantoja, Deiveson Figueiredo, Kai Kara France, Deiveson Figueiredo, Brandon Royval, Jussier Formiga, Kai Kara France, Askar Askarov. I mean, talk about a run. Then before that, even before before that, you have, a guy named Malik Perez. But then before that, Alexandre Pantoja, Sergio Pettis, Dustin Ortiz. Dustin Ortiz, okay, cut him off the list. But you get my point. I mean, has there been a harder stretch from 2017 to 2023? I don't know if there's got a guy who's had a stronger strength of schedule than Brandon Moreno. So he has all this experience against top flight competition, and he's facing Amir Albazi, where you look at the guys he's fought. Kai Kara France, okay, but a lot of people thought he lost that fight. It was a close fight. Alessandro Costa, who came in on short notice. Francisco Figueiredo, Zhalgas Zhumagulov, Malcolm Gordon, Ryan Curtis. And that's even before his UFC career. It's not against the best level of competition. So early prediction for that fight, I have to go Brandon Moreno. I can't pick Amir Albazi based off what I've seen thus far. Maybe he'll prove he's one of the top flight flyweights in the division. And I'm assuming the winner of this fight will most likely get a title shot. It's kind of up in the air because if you look at the rankings right now, you have Manel Kape, who has a fight coming up as well against, I think it's Mateus Nicolau, if I'm not mistaken. And if he wins that fight, he's going to be very close to a title shot himself as well. He's on a long winning streak. But the UFC wants to build up a champion in Mexico. So my guess, if Brandon Moreno goes out there and beats Amir Albazi, I could see them booking him against the winner of Pantoja versus Royval, which would be a rematch no matter what. I mean, Moreno versus Pantoja, I know they've already fought 3 times, I think. Yeah, 3 times. They fought once on The Ultimate Fighter, once in the UFC, and then twice in the UFC. But once not for a belt and once for a belt. Who doesn't want to see that fight again? And I know that it seems like a common theme with Brandon Moreno, but he's always in exciting fights. And against Royval got injured in their fight. So they kind of have some unfinished business there. So if Royval wins or Pantoja wins, unless there's an immediate rematch, if Moreno beats Albazi, I could see him getting the next title shot. Also, if Albazi beats Moreno, he's beaten a former champ. He's probably going to be next in line. I wouldn't mind seeing the winner of Moreno versus Albazi fight Manel Kape if he beats Nicolau, but I don't know the exact timeline how that would work out. But it's got to be a combination of the winner of Moreno versus Albazi against potentially Kape if Kape wins for a number 1 contender spot. One of those guys is going to be fighting for next in line. So that's a massive fight for the division. And honestly, I think Brandon Moreno is probably a bigger star in Mexico. So they probably will headline him. I'm going to go out on a limb and saying this is probably going to be the main event. Typically they do the heavier weight class, but I feel like Brandon Moreno would help the UFC sell more tickets on a fight night card in Mexico. Moving on to the next fight that was announced, we have Yair Rodriguez versus Brian Ortega. I love this matchup. And I know, some people think there was a fluke win by Yair Rodriguez when they fought the first time, which really wasn't that long ago. It was July 16th of 2022. Brian Ortega hurt his shoulder early in the fight, but really Yair Rodriguez submitted him. He was going for an armbar. Ortega tried to pull his arm out, hurt his shoulder. It was a submission win for Yair Rodriguez. He doesn't get any credit for that for some reason. He does not get any credit. Then after that, beats the brakes off of Josh Emmett to win the interim featherweight belt, then goes out there and gets TKO'd by Alexander Volkanovski. No shame in that. Then meanwhile, you have Brian Ortega. Honestly, Brian Ortega doesn't even deserve the Yair Rodriguez fight. If you look at their current rankings, though, Yair's number 2, Ortega's number 3, so it makes perfect sense in terms of the rankings. Brian Ortega is one of the biggest ranking squatters I've ever seen in my entire life. I cannot believe it. He's won 1 fight since March of 2018. 1 fight in 5 years. He's basically on the Conor McGregor resume plant. You look at his fights, he lost to Max Holloway for the title, got absolutely wrecked there. Beat the dead body of Chan Sung Jung and the Korean Zombie. Then got a title shot against Alexander Volkanovski, which he really shouldn't even got. Got destroyed there. I know people act like that was one of the greatest fights of all time because Ortega almost had a submission. It was not close. Volkanovski beat the crap out of him. Outside of that 1 close submission, it wasn't a competitive fight. And then he lost to Yair, and he hasn't fought against Yair since. So we have a guy ranked number 3 who has 1 win since 2018. Or since March of 2018, where he beat Frankie Edgar. So his last 2 wins are the Korean Zombie, Frankie Edgar, and Cub Swanson. Are those good wins at all? So I'm happy he's finally stepping in there. But honestly, he needs to be dropping the rankings. I wanted to see Diego Lopez get a shot against Brian Ortega because Diego Lopez out there putting in work, so exciting, amazing jiu-jitsu, great striking. I would have loved to see him against Brian Ortega. Brian Ortega earlier this year was talking about ducking Ilia Topuria. Look where Topuria is now. He's fighting for a belt. Brian Ortega was offered that fight supposedly. That's just a rumor, but supposedly he was offered that fight. And based off what Brian Ortega said, it seems like he was offered that fight. So Brian Ortega, I think he's massively overrated. I think he is a good fighter. I think his striking has improved. But he's been out for how long now? It's going to be coming up on what? 2 years by the time he fights, basically? A little under 2 years. It's going to be over 1.5 years by the time Brian Ortega fights next. And he's going to fight Yair Rodriguez, lose to him, and then fight Yair again. And, I don't trust Brian Ortega to win this fight. He relies too much on his submission game. He relies too much on his jiu-jitsu. And striking, Yair Rodriguez blows him out of the water. The kicks are nasty. I mean, the power in his kicks are unbelievable. The footwork, everything's improving. The hands are improving. I do understand that Yair Rodriguez has been out-grappled. He got out-grappled by Alexander Volkanovski. He even got taken down by Josh Emmett. Brian Ortega got a takedown that led to the submission win for Yair Rodriguez. Max Holloway took him down a couple times. So I understand there is a checkered past in terms of Yair Rodriguez's takedown defense. But the guy just never accepts position on bottom. He's always looking to do damage with elbows from the bottom. He's always looking to lock up a triangle or an arm bar or just use something to scramble out and get back to his feet. And I think Brian Ortega is coming back, almost a 2-year layoff, going to have some ring rust. He already doesn't have the best striking. Yair's going to be game plan. He's like, I got to defend the takedown. I got to defend the takedown. I got to defend the takedown. Use his footwork, blast kicks, body kicks, head kicks, leg kicks. Brian Ortega just plots forward heavy on that lead leg. So I see Yair Rodriguez going out there and probably stopping Brian Ortega again, probably by TKO. I see him just stopping him. I don't trust Brian Ortega basically with a 2-year layoff coming back from an injury, fighting Yair Rodriguez, who's been getting better this entire time. I know he lost to Volkanovski, but there's literally no shame in that. So I think this is a perfect matchup just because a lot of people say, oh, it was a fluke win for Yair getting the submission. I don't think it was a fluke win. I would have liked to seen it go further. I would have liked to seen how Yair was able to scramble out and maybe get back to his feet and see some of the striking exchanges more. But early on, we saw some striking exchanges, and Yair was beating him up on the feet before he got taken down and got the submission right after he got taken down. So it's one of those fights where I feel like we've already seen it, but I understand people are kind of like, oh, well, we didn't get, we weren't satisfied with the finish. We didn't get a result that felt like we truly found out who was the better fighter. I'm not in that camp, but nonetheless, Yair coming off a loss to the champion, I don't mind him fighting Brian Ortega. And if Yair goes out there and starches Brian Ortega, I don't think it's the best win, but you look at the featherweight division right now, let's say Topuria beats Volkanovski. I understand Max Holloway would probably be close to a title shot, and Volkanovski would probably get a rematch. But who wouldn't love to see Ilia Topuria versus Yair Rodriguez? That'd be a banger fight. That'd be a straight-up banger fight. Now, Brian Ortega has a lot of work to do. I don't want to see him jumping into a title fight. But a win over Yair Rodriguez means a lot for his career as well. He's probably 1-2 fights away from a title shot. The division has a lot of parity right now, considering Volkanovski's beaten a lot of these guys. Now, if Topuria wins, all bets are off of what happens, because then Volkanovski might get a rematch. Max Holloway comes back into the equation. But I love this UFC Fight Night Mexico card. I love both cards. I'm probably going Brandon Moreno. I didn't say how I would pick Brandon Moreno. I'd probably pick him by decision. Albazi's durable and very tough, and tough to finish as well. But Yair Rodriguez, I'd pick him via TKO over Brian Ortega. And my official prediction is I think Moreno versus Albazi will be the main event, and Rodriguez versus Ortega 2 will be the co-main event. But that is already, blooming as a stacked UFC Fight Night card, so I cannot wait for that card. Let me know your guys' thoughts down in the comments. Don't forget to like the video. Don't forget to subscribe, and thank you so much for watching.